My name's Anna Kennedy and I'm a parent of 2 young men on the autism spectrum, and I'm also founder of a charity that's called Anna Kennedy Online. I am very much about raising awareness and acceptance for autism. I had to fight for everything for my sons. Patrick is 28, he's got a diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome, and Angelo is 25 and he's got a diagnosis of quite a significant sensory processing condition, severe autism and nocturnal epilepsy. So once you get a diagnosis of autism, I found out that nobody actually sits down with you and says, this is what autism is. No one actually says to you, there's 17 or 18 different strategies of working with a young person on the spectrum. How do I know which one is the right place for my son? There's just so many different ones and you just think, I don't know which one to choose. No one explains them to you. It all boils down to funding, the cuts and everything that goes with it, and you have to fight for your children. If you don't speak up for them, no one else is going to do it. And what I say is parents have to get their body armour on and they need to fight. It very much depends where you live. It's the same with diagnosis. About 5 years ago, I put a survey out to parents. I got 2,000 responses back. And on average, some parents are waiting 5 years for a diagnosis. That's a long time in a child's life, especially when you read early intervention is crucial. When both my boys were diagnosed, they were just receiving 5 hours home tuition from the local authority because Patrick was really struggling in mainstream school. Maybe if we'd have known he had a diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome at 4 years old, we might have been able to help him. But because he struggled for 3 years of me trying to get him to school, he just became a very anxious young man. Angelo was diagnosed quite early, so obviously I was reading about autism. And when it was time for Angelo to start school, they said they couldn't meet his need, they didn't have a place for him. So I had 2 boys at home and I was thinking, early intervention, where is it? Where am I going to get it for my boys? So they said that I would get 5 hours home tuition. So we turned our little garage into a classroom. And the first lady that worked with Patrick was great. She'd worked with a young person with autism before. Actually, she'd worked with quite a few. And the lady that was working with Angelo had never, ever worked with a child with autism. I didn't blame her, but she was given the job. After the 3rd day, I remember she was just totally out of her depth. She sat on our carpet in the lounge and she started crying because she didn't know what to do. So I thought, we've got to do something. I was also told that my sons were the only boys in the area that had autism. But when I started reaching out to people, I put an article in the local paper. 275 families came out of the woodwork of children, of adults. So we decided to set up a support group to support each other because there was just nothing in the area where we lived. I met a gentleman that had an adult son that was in a mental health unit. It just sounded like the most horrendous place. And I just thought, I don't want my sons to go into this place. So I heard about a school that they were going to knock down and build 37 flats. It was very near to where I lived. And if I hadn't have known about this school, I wouldn't have walked down that pathway. I wouldn't have seen that this was a school that was meant for children with physical disabilities, but they were going to knock it down and build 37 flats. So I climbed over the fence, I looked in the building and I thought this would be perfect for children with autism. So I approached the local authority and I always remember speaking to a lady from the head of client services, and she was the lady that supported me and she was the one that helped me navigate through the complicated system. So what we had to do was we had to put a feasibility study together, and they told us we needed to raise £625,000 worth of refurbishment in order for them to lease the school to us for 30 years. We had £3,000 in the bank and I said, we can do it. My husband said, you're mad. He said, how are we going to do this? I said, well, we can't live like this. I was just permanently shattered, permanently worrying about what the future was going to hold for my sons. So I thought, it can't get any worse than what we're doing now. So what we did was we went through the whole process. It was difficult. I'm not saying it wasn't. They did put us through the mill and they did keep changing the goalposts. We got the keys in January, and because of me taking the boys there every day, because I had nowhere else to take them, we actually opened the school in September of the same year, and the whole of the school was open within 18 months. It was the most rewarding project. It was the most scary project. I remember when the Department for Education were coming the first week before we opened to make sure it was fit for purpose. I remember the month afterwards that they could actually close the school if they didn't feel it was appropriate. And I always remember the inspector at the end of the day, he said, if I had a child with autism, I wouldn't hesitate and send them to this school. After that, I was looking at what provision was available for adults, because obviously this gentleman that was working with us, his son was in this dreadful place. So we had to try and find somewhere of getting him out of there. So we thought we'd set up a vocational college and a residential home. So there's 45 adults now that go to that college, and my son Angelo started 3 years ago, and we still had to fight for funding to get him to go into that college. Since then, we've set up a charity which is called Anna Kennedy Online, and I do an awful lot of work raising awareness and acceptance. And what I want to do is I just want our children and adults just to make their presence felt in the world, just like everybody else. Sometimes it just takes a small, reasonable adjustment to make a big difference to that child's life. With the charity, I do a lot of work with performing arts, and it all started with our anti-bullying campaign, which is called Give Us a Break. And that was because children were getting bullied. It was happening more in schools, it was happening more online, within the community. So they started sending it in to me through the charity, YouTube links of them singing, dancing, playing the guitar. And I thought, this is amazing. And a lot of them, it was because they were bullied, they were looking for a different avenue so that they didn't have to think about it. So I approached Pineapple Performing Arts, and I knew that they were doing regular shows, and I said, would you fancy doing something with us? So we went to see a theatre, the Mermaid Theatre, and we've been doing it for 7 years. I am now known as the Simon Cowell of the autism world, and it's not a competition, it's a showcase of talent. And it's amazing talent. And it amazes me that some people just come along, it's a little bit tokenistic because they think, oh, let's go and support the charity. But when they sit in the show, they really have been entertained. And I have heard people say, oh, I didn't expect to be entertained. Why? Why wouldn't you expect to be entertained? So what I try to do is try and fit in our children and adults into the mainstream world. We created our very first charity album. I went to the Hard Rock Cafe in Mayfair. I said, would you be prepared to launch our album here? It was amazing, absolutely amazing. The kids were like buzzing. I never ever thought, if somebody told me, a girl from Middlesbrough that used to do dance, because I like dances, I was a dance teacher, and then I worked for a textile manufacturer, really boring job, that I would have set up 2 schools, a college, a residential home, a charity, been known as the Simon Cowell of the autism world. It's my passion, it's my drive. And when you've got passion and drive, you can achieve anything. You can put your mind to anything. You really can. And what I always do is that if somebody tells me no, I always find someone who's going to tell me yes. And there'll always be someone who'll tell you yes. So what I do is, instead of, like, for example, I'm really grateful for getting the OBE from the Queen. That was an amazing experience. But it's given me an opportunity to do other things. So instead of knocking on the door, almost like I've been given the key to open the door and walk in. It's been 100 years since women won the right to vote. I asked myself, do we have a long way to go yet? And I just think, yes, we do. We always strive forward, always forge ahead for what you believe in. I'd like to thank Amnesty International for nominating me to head up this campaign, if you like. And I feel really honoured. Every time I get an award, I do feel honoured, but I always reflect on myself thinking, what am I doing differently? Why have they chosen me? But do you know what? I think it's because I am passionate about what I believe in. I am driven, I am enthusiastic, and I think those are really key ingredients for women to get to where they want to be.